It's my pleasure today to welcome you to the James W. Richards Lectures for 2010. The Richards Lectures were established by an endowment that came to the university in 1923. These lectures are to be devoted, one set to the study of religion and another set to the study of history, especially comparative history. Over the last 90 years, we've had some tremendously distinguished speakers. The first lectures were given in 1931 by William Albright, and they concerned the archaeology of Palestine and the Bible. Thereafter, as a theologian, I think in particular of three enormously influential series of lectures. There was Etienne Gilson in 1937, who spoke of reason and revelation in the Middle Ages. There was Paul Tillich in 1951, who spoke on biblical religion and the search for ultimate reality. And there was Paul Ricoeur in 1970, speaking on the relation of word and scripture. This evening, we add another very distinguished scholar to the list of Richard's lectures, the French philosopher and theologian Jean-Yves Lacoste. It's a particular pleasure and an honour for me to introduce Jean-Yves Lacoste this evening. We've known one another since we first met in Leuven in Belgium about 20 years ago. You might think when two theologians meet that they talk right away about theology, and I assure you that that's usually what happens. But at this dinner we talked about recent work in paraconsistent logic. Now, logicians usually walk in fear of inconsistency, but paraconsistent logic does not. It recognizes that inconsistency can tell us a great deal about certain situations of interest to logicians. Justice cannot always be done to a complex situation if the only values available to us are true and false. Sometimes one needs to work with a many-valued logic, including the value of true and false, or neither true nor false. Sometimes one needs to attend to logics that exhibit formal inconsistencies of one kind or another. Now, why should two theologians talk about paraconsistent logic? Well, it's not simply because, being a rather odd theologian, my first publication was in mathematics. Rather, the answer is quite different. Sometimes our talk about God cannot be accommodated by the two values of true and false. Sometimes our attempts to formulate our understanding of the central teachings of Christianity show formal and informal inconsistencies. And these inconsistencies need to be treated with justice rather than sheared off in the interest of neatness. So Jean-Yves Lacoste is a theologian whose work has a profound philosophical character. When we read Lacoste's work, we encounter someone deeply versed in the German and French traditions of philosophy, and someone sure-footed in the world of analytic philosophy. Perhaps the best way to place Lacoste is to say that he works in the field of phenomenology, the philosophical approach to questions elaborated early in the last century by Husserl and Heidegger. One might say that phenomenology is the gentle art of nudging phenomena so that they show themselves to us. One of the most important things in the study of Christian theology today is the renewal, the relaunching, the rethinking of phenomenology in theological context. 2 years ago, Jean-Luc Marion spoke about this with clarity and passion from this very lecture. And this evening we have another distinguished French phenomenologist who will be talking to us. If he's not explicitly doing phenomenology as such this evening, but rather speaking of the relations between philosophy and theology, I do not doubt that new phenomena will be nudged in our direction. One theme in Lacoste's work is the rejection of the very idea that God is available to human experience. There is no such thing as religious experience, especially in the sense that God gives himself to us in feeling. Schleiermacher was no more than a maker of veils after all. Rather, for Lacoste, God is knowable as lovable. Such is the burden of his books, from experience and the absolute to la phenomenalité de Dieu. Now, Lacoste does not simply write books of philosophy and theology. He's also the editor of the, in English, 3-volume Encyclopedia of Christian Theology, which is one of the most important reference books for anyone studying Christian thought. And if you don't know about it, I commend you to go to the Alderman Library and look it up. Many of the most trenchant entries in those 3 volumes are ones that he has written himself. He himself is an encyclopedia of Christian theology, and a very stylish one as well. Not the least pleasure in reading Jean-Yves Lacoste is the beauty of his French prose. This evening, though, Professor Lacoste will be speaking to us in English, a language in which he's perfectly at home. His Richard's lectures are entitled From Theology to Theological Thinking. I think that perhaps I hear a little Heidegger in the background of that, but I know that there is going to be a great deal more in the foreground. This evening, in his first lecture, he will speak to us on Theoria, Vita Philosophica, and Christian experience. Please join me in welcoming Jean-Yves Lacoste.